everyone. Hi, I'm Rose Kirk, Verizon's Chief Corporate Social Responsibility Officer, and welcome to a great conversation, the state of the school year. Joining me for that conversation is Kevin Boles. He is a principal at Franklin D. Roosevelt Middle School in Bristol, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
And also, Ziad Ahmed. Ziad is a Yale student activist, entrepreneur, and speaker. Welcome, Ziad.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, thank you. So let's jump in. So I think our conversation is very timely with school having started already in some places in the country and will be starting soon. So let's talk a little bit about the state of the school year in terms of the ecosystem that exists. So Kevin, as a principal, you are dealing with issues of national expectations, local and regional expectations, city, community expectations, and then the needs of students and the needs of your teachers. How do you think about traversing all of those pieces?
Students first. That is the first thing that we focus on when we talk about navigating all of the things that we do. We luckily have great administrators that take care of a lot of those things and allow us to focus on curriculum and focus on changing the way that we deliver content for students, which is so important.
So you talk about students first, and then, Ziad, you have this point of view that if you're having any conversation in America about the state of education, students ought to be not only thought about first, but actually in the conversation. Share more.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that my work is all about, if we're having a conversation about a group of people, that group of people should be present, and they shouldn't just have a folding chair 10 feet away from the table, they should be at the head of it. So when we're talking about the classroom, those experiencing the classroom today should be at the forefront of that conversation. And I think that's really the ethos of our generation, is by amplifying voices and creating capacity and community. And that's why I'm so thankful to be here today, right? To offer the student experience, to offer the student perspective, because too many of these conversations about the state of the school year are had without voices like mine, without the student perspective.
So let me push on that a little bit, because I think there's two different students here, if you will. So if Kevin is the representation of the students at his school, I want you to talk about who your middle school students are, how they profile, and then what it means for them to take a seat at the table. Because Ziad, you come through a very different experience, one that is probably a little bit more privileged, and therefore you can have a seat at the table with a different type of risk.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack that a little bit. So who are your students?
Our students in Bristol, PA, we have over 65% of students who are free and reduced lunch. So they come to us with very little experience. So bringing that experience to school when we're trying to have them make connections, because education is all about making connections to the content that we're trying to teach. 15 years ago, 18 years ago, when I was first starting teaching in Bristol Township, we took a group of students to Harrisburg, PA. And we went to the State Museum, and we went to the Capitol building, and we saw all this rich history. Came back to school the next day, said, draw me a picture of something that you learned yesterday in our trip. And the two most frequent pictures I've received were the tour bus on the ride out and the cows in the fields, because those are the first two things that they experienced. So we couldn't get them to the point where they were looking at that rich history, looking at how the Capitol building has tiles from every county in Pennsylvania on the Capitol Rotunda floor. We couldn't get them to make those connections because they hadn't experienced the tour bus and the cows. So that's why we talk about the integration of technology and always eliminating that digital divide and giving them access to information at all times so they can have those experiences to tie to. They can have access to that information so they learn that information and can tie that to the things that we're trying to teach them in school.
That's a very powerful story in terms of just the simple thing that the kids saw and remembered and registered so they could even get to what you were trying to teach them. But let's talk then about your experience, right? Because those kids were drawing the cow and the tour bus, and let's be clear, those kids are bright and capable and successful. They just had different life experiences. You had a computer at age 4. So
not quite age 4.
Well, were you 5?
Probably age 8.
8, okay.
Yes, yes.
So then bridge a little bit for me that view of the risk that you could take in your seat at the table and being a voice.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to be very transparent about the fact that I was enormously privileged to have access to technology at a young age, right? And I've been really, really lucky to be able to do incredible things and incredible work as a result of that access and a result of the access that meant to connecting to folks like you on Twitter, right? And I want to be transparent about that, but I also want to say that Generation Z, we're dubbed the plurals because we think in terms of we. We think in terms of us. So just because I had access does not then mean that I am not equally invested in the welfare and success of those who don't have access. In fact, it means that I know intimately, right, how disadvantaged so many students are who don't have that access, right? And I want to be invested in these conversations thinking about, I know what this can do for people. I know what technology can do for people. And Generation Z is all about thinking, right, about who isn't at the table right now, who is being disadvantaged, and how can we empower them? So I think that, yeah, I should have a voice at the table sometimes. Other folks should have a voice at the table other times. It's about not just me or one other person. It's about reconsidering how we think about students, reconsidering how we think about young people, because a myriad of lived experiences are a part of Generation Z. We're the largest generational cohort that there is today. So we need to be amplifying all of our voices because, like you said, right, the students at your school have a vastly different lived experience than me, but they're both equally true and authentic to Generation Z, and we need to be amplifying all of these narratives to present this nuanced, but really pure and raw view of today. But I think that across all these intersections, we stand united in that technology is a fundamental part of our growth and learning. Whether or not we have access to it, we get that, right? We get how powerful it can be.
And Kevin, I see you, thank you for that, and I see you nodding your head, saying that it's a fundamental right of our knowledge and our learning is what I think you just said. So how does that manifest itself inside of your school? How do you make it a right for kids who don't have access at all and don't have it at home?
Well, the beauty of it is through the relationship that we have been so honored to have with the Verizon Foundation. 4 years ago, my school did not have Wi-Fi. Wrap your brain around that.
Most basic thing, right? It's like air now.
4
Water,
years ago, we did
it.
not have Wi-Fi. Our students didn't have devices. So through this grant, our students were afforded that opportunity to have all-time access. So when you talk about the impact that it's had on our students and that always on, always being able to connect with information, 15 years ago, we had students who were drawing pictures of buses and cows in a field. We now have students who are creating LGBTQ bathroom in Tinkercad and dropping it into virtual reality. And what we also have is what I'd like to think is the first of its kind middle school maker lab that our students have the opportunity to work in virtual reality, augmented reality. They have the opportunity to work with a laser cutter and 3D printers and a music and movie maker booth. So that all-time access, but also being able to create, which is so important. In education today, when we all grew up, it was teachers told you what to do and you did it. Now we have to turn that around and change that way that we approach education and give students more of a voice in what they create. And that's one of the most important points of when you talk about students having a voice and being able to connect the information. Students do have to have a voice in even the projects that they create in school on a daily basis.
So let me just kind of unpack that as well. So you're talking about the work, Verizon Innovative Learning, in which we are adopting underrepresented middle schools across the nation and really providing them with this immersive learning curriculum, technology, access. And then there's a lab that is inside of your school that takes it to an even higher level with access to every current technology that exists, from augmented reality to virtual reality, coding, 3D printing, et cetera. But let's talk a little bit more then about this space of state of the school and what it means for teachers and this expectation. So no one's going to argue and debate that we should put technology inside of a school. But it also means that teachers are having to think very differently about how they show up and about the role of their sort of what they provide and what the student is doing. So what were your experiences growing up in terms of your interaction with students in a space where you had access to all of the technology, to your teachers rather, to all of the technology, and what would be your message to teachers in terms of the opportunity with that?
Yeah. Well, I think that the first thing, right, connects back to what I was saying earlier. A lot of technology is assumed that it's working, right, that it's working right. I think that we have to have authentic conversations with young people about what's working, what isn't working. Because just putting an iPad on our fingertips might not just be, it's just the first step. But think about how can we use these tools thoughtfully? How can we use these tools to build capacity, to build community? So I think that teachers need to be talking to students about, okay, it's not just, okay, we're doing a PowerPoint, we're checking off the box of using technology, but how can we creatively engage our students across numerous mediums, building in things like 3D printing, building in things like VR, right? How can we think creatively? And I think Generation Z is all about, okay, technology exists as this huge concept of things, right? There's so many ways that we can use technology. But as social media natives, we think in terms of social media. We think in terms of the digital tools that we've been brought up using to share in real time forever. So how do we harness that power of connection and community to empower our learning?
So is your point of view that we should actually be very thoughtful and very specific about the tools, whether it's social media, whether it is the latest technology, as an integrated part of any school curriculum?
Absolutely.
Do you believe that, Kevin?
I do.
Tell me more.
Technology would never replace great teachers. Great teachers are the ones who deliver content, but the technology helps them deliver content in a different way. 15 years ago, students sitting in rows, teachers telling students exactly what to do. This is the project. Everyone does the same project. It might be on a different person in social studies or history. Now it's teachers teaching students skills and then saying, you show me how what you've learned. And that's why it's so important that they use that technology to then be able to express what they've learned. But you could have 15 different projects in a class that have expressed what they've learned. But technology is never going to replace excellent teachers. It's changing the way we deliver that content, which is so important.
So I'm going to put my teacher hat on for just a second. Not that I ever was a teacher, but I had some brilliant, great teachers, friends who were teachers, relatives who were teachers. So I would say to you, yes, but look, I have national standards. I have issues that I have to do. I have data that shows that if a kid isn't actually passing math in 6th or 7th grade, they have a chance of not even graduating from high school, that they are not going to have the opportunities. So help me understand how I still do what's required of me and deliver the curriculum and deliver the academic excellence while you're asking me to make social media central to what I'm doing.
We as educators sometimes have to give up that power. As teachers, with your teacher hat, you want to have control over every single thing that you do because that's what you were brought up knowing. It's giving up that power and giving students, but it's also from an administrator's perspective, very important for me to support through good mentoring programs, through helping teachers through that piece. Sometimes we are not going to get through all of that curriculum. And you know what? In my mind as administrator, I might be laughed at by this, but the high impact learning experiences will greatly outweigh missing one standard or getting to a standard after we get to a standardized test. Because that's what's going to be most important is those students making those positive connections, but it's also understanding that lessons are going to fail too. Failure is the first attempt in learning. So when I talk to teachers, it's supporting them in the decisions that they make, but also fostering this environment where I want you to take risks. I don't want your the original lessons where it was, this is exactly the way it should be. I want you to try things differently. I want you to use the Samra model where you're redefining the way that you're teaching students, not just substituting the technology for another lesson.
So failure is the first attempt at learning. I like that. Explain what the Samra model is. You just referenced that. Everyone may not know what that is.
The Samra model is the way that you will integrate technology into lessons that you have in school. So Samra is substitution. So you're taking one lesson and replacing it for another using the technology. You have augmentation, where you're just augmenting the lesson. You have modification, and then redefinition, where you're completely changing the way that you're delivering that lesson than what you traditionally would have done in the past.
And so if you think about that, redefinition and redefining it, that's what your whole life has been about.
Yeah,
and that's why you've been so successful at such a young age. Talk about what that meant to you to be in a school, in an environment where that was happening, and then how you use it every day in your entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we're a generation of redefining. we're a generation about thinking critically about disrupting the status quo. And I think that that isn't new. And a lot of folks in other generations tell me, right, look at Vietnam, look at these other instances where young people came together and said, we're gonna change something, we're gonna disrupt the status quo, we're gonna get other generations to see things differently. But I think that what positions us differently is how our digital tools can help us achieve those goals. And I think that when we're talking about this teacher conversation, right, how do teachers play a role in grappling with that, it's acknowledging it. Right? We can't pretend like students aren't learning on social media. We can't pretend like we're not using Wolfram Alpha. We can't pretend like we're not using the tools that exist online to empower or impede our learning. Right? So when we talk about social media, we need to talk about what is the goal of it. Right? When we talk about disrupting the status quo or redefinition, we need to realize that it's already happening and that young people have been doing it. We've been out here. We've been out here disrupting the status quo. We've been out here thinking critically about a lot of these norms and saying, it doesn't have to be this way.
So when you say these norms don't have to be that way, give me one example of a norm in a classroom that you wish wasn't that way.
Being talked at, right? Being talked to rather than being in conversation with. I know from my experience, and I think that a lot of generations, leaders, and people, the most profound moments of learning are not a lecture, but it's a conversation. It's when I learn from you, Rose, right, about your experience and your trailblazing work, and I say, wow, right, that's applicable to my life and my journey in this way. So why isn't that model reflected in my school? And I think that another huge misconception that we're having in terms of the classroom is current events are oftentimes being completely ignored, right? We're not talking about current events, but if we're on social media, we're seeing what's trending. Right? My intersecting identity, right? If I'm an American Muslim, right? If you're a person of color, you're seeing these news items, right? And Generation Z is the most diverse generation, right? Almost more than 51% of us are people of color, right? Up to 50% of us identify as something other than queer, other than straight, right? So we're one of the most diverse generations, the most diverse generation ever. So these headlines, what's happening in the world affects us, affects our learning, but then it's not being talked about in schools.
So do you think that if the opportunity, and Kevin, this really question is for you, is if we change that education, that classroom, right, where you said sometimes things are gonna fail, sometimes you're not gonna get to that curriculum, but you gotta figure out a way to engage that teacher, that student. Yet we're losing teachers, right? It's a profession that people don't want to go in, particularly in low-income schools. They struggle with having teachers who are qualified to teach some of our most critical subject matter, like math, like science. So what do you see as the bridge to sort of what Ziad believes is a necessity, what you believe about the role of technology, and what the opportunity is to motivate and bring on and retain teachers?
I think there's two separate pieces there. The bring on is so important. Just in the state of Pennsylvania, they've seen a decrease from 2009 to 2014 of 18,000 down to 6,000 students who are going into teacher certification programs. That is tremendous. So it's incentivizing or making their incentive there to be able to have more people say, you know what, this is what I want to go into. The other piece is retaining good teachers. Teaching is not easy. People sometimes often believe teachers go home for the summer. I receive more emails from my teachers over the summer than I send out because they want to know what's going on. So it's retaining and supporting those teachers in their craft and their trade. Think of your job this way. Every single year, you get a different set of expectations, 29 different students. Curriculum has changed. The state's changed our expectations this way, and do that every single year. New teachers are hard to retain because of that. It takes 5 years to become proficient in your trade. That's the average to be able to become a really good teacher. So it's supporting teachers through good mentor programs. It's also good to have a great relationship between the administrators and teachers and support them and let them know that I'm not going to give you an unsatisfactory piece if you're going to go out and try new things, because I do want to see that. And I think that's an important piece of administrators is to really support that risk-taking, but also build positive relationships and allow teachers to be creative in the way that they deliver content.
Yeah. I also think that we as a society and we as a student bodies, right, we as a student perspective, need to value teachers more. I think that teachers are underpaid. I think that teachers are oftentimes diminished. And I think that part of the reason why we're seeing those numbers go down is because they aren't paid enough. They're not valued enough. Being a teacher is probably one of the most fundamental jobs that we have, one of the most fundamental times that we have, right, is school, to really pave a better tomorrow for all of us. Right? In Generation Z, we're forward thinkers. Right? We want tomorrow to be better, to be brighter, to be more beautiful. The way that we do that is by investing in the places like Verizon is doing where learning is happening. And I think that fundamentally we as a society and we as students need to say, teachers are making things move. Teachers are the ones who are saying, we're going to invest our time and energy into building that better tomorrow. So we need to be putting our money where our mouth is and saying, we need to value teachers more, because then we'll retain them, because they're putting in the hours and they're putting in the emotional energy. And I think that we don't talk about that enough in schools, right? Things take not just time or effort that you can measure tangibly, but this intangible emotional energy that has, and there's so much emotional labor that goes into developing the relationships with students, right? There are teachers who are taking students in, right, because they have nowhere to sleep at night. There are teachers who are buying lunch for their students. Teachers are buying their own school supplies, let alone, and there's no money for technology. They have to buy paper and pencils. So how can we as students say thank you? Right? Thank you for doing this work. And then how is we in society saying, how can we do more to invest in this vital profession?
So those are all good points and very well said. And thank you for saying that. And thank you for appreciating teachers. You have a platform.
Yeah.
How does your platform lean into those opportunities and really galvanize your generation to actually help that profession?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, right, my organization that I founded in 8th grade, Redefine, right, we worked in schools all around the world, and we're constantly thinking about how can we partner with the allies and the administration in schools that we have. There are teachers who want to be doing this work. There are teachers who want to be thinking critically about identity, right, and about how their students of different identities are grappling with realities. So we are constantly having conversations internally about how do we find those teachers, how do we tap into their love and resources to make our work better, and how do we say thanks, right? When I had my graduation party, my teachers who taught me in 2nd grade were there, right? And when I spoke, I said thanks to them. It's about constantly calling them back in and saying, where I am today is because of those who taught me. Is because of those who invested in me. And at every step of the way, I want to say thank you, and I want to say more of us should be saying thank you, because value's about that. Value is about showing up for it, and I think that we as a generation, through my company, through my nonprofit, and all Generation Z is saying, we want teachers to be paid more. We want to value them, and constantly amplifying that message, right? Speaking up, tweeting about it, showing up to protests. There's so many protests happening. There are walkouts, like the local public school in my town, to get teachers paid more. Young people are invested in the welfare, right, of those teaching us, and I think more of us are doing that because we are a generation that is building movements and memes simultaneously. We're a generation that our ethos is change-making, and I think we're showing up for that.
So we talked about this state of the school year in terms of the opportunities that exist for teachers, both in terms of teacher appreciation, but also beyond that and getting them the tools that they need to be successful. We talked about the need to change so the way that the classroom is run, to think about it very differently, more collaborative, more problem solving, all these skills, analytical, all these skills that kids are going to need to be successful in the future. And we talked about this need for deep immersive technology. But there's also a space that says all of that can happen, but we still have a need for some incremental things to drive success in our schools. Kevin, what are those incremental things that are also needed?
I go back to students first. It's having a laser focus on what is most important with what we do. It's being able to take that outside message that we sometimes get where teachers are talked down upon and said, you only work 10 months a year, and really putting them to the side and really focusing on that. It's educators being able to band together, being able to communicate with one another, using social media to work together, create lessons. Twitter is a huge tool to use. Those are the types of things, that collaboration is so important for student success, but the collaboration between teachers from across the country. One of the best things that, like I said, through the Verizon Innovative Learning Lab is having students be able to experience things that they would never have the opportunity to. So when our students are going to Valley Forge and taking video of the huts that soldiers had lived in over the winter through virtual reality or the 3D video, and students in California being able to see that. Those are experiences that are so important for our students, not just in Bristol, Pennsylvania, but across the country to be able to experience and be able to see things that they had never done before.
So how long have you been at Verizon Innovative Learning School?
We are now, we just finished our 4th year.
In your 4th year. So then fundamentally tell me, 4 years ago, who was your student, and now who is your student? Profile them for me.
Students had no access. We had families who had no access. The access to information at all times has been not just huge for our students, but for our whole school community, and that includes our parents too, who sometimes didn't have access. So our ELL population parents now have access to be able to go and look for jobs, which is so important. Our students now are driving what's happening in school. We have students, like I said, who created a LGBTQ bathroom in Tinkercad and dropped it into virtual reality. Just last week, we had Senator Tomlinson and Congressman Fitzpatrick, and they walked around amazed at what our students have been able to do in this space, saying, I would have never imagined doing this when I was in 6th grade or 7th grade. So it's those experiences for our students to be able to learn, have the freedom to be able to go into that space and create stuff that ties to the content that they're learning in the classrooms is just so important.
Excellent. So I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience that's here with us today.
But I have a question. How do you link the poorer schools without the technology to the other schools that have all the activities? Is there any way to link it besides Verizon? Are there other places?
So the question was, how do we link the schools? How do we create the opportunity where you have schools that have privilege to schools that do not have privilege? Do you want to take that? Yes, there are absolutely multiple ways that we do that, because the opportunity is to take a look at really the learning profile, right? So it's really about taking what is happening in a privileged school and deliver it directly into an underserved school so that they are having the same experience every day that they are coming to school, every day that they are in school, so that it is not a situation where you have to go to the privileged school to get it, but your school then feels like the privileged school, and that's what Verizon Innovative Learning can provide.
And I also think through social media, right, we can connect with one another. Right, even if the infrastructure isn't paved out for us, we as students are constantly connecting with those with different lived experiences and thinking about how can we amplify each other, right? How can we pass the mic to each other? And I think that when we think about it in those terms, when we think about it as, look, I have privilege, I'm gonna spend my privilege. Right, I'm gonna figure out how can I offer my access and my agency and pass that along to those who don't have it. We can build capacity and community together.
Thank you. Right? Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for a great talk. My mom was a teacher, so this all means a lot, and it's really great to hear. I'm gonna go home and tell her everything that you guys said. I guess my question is, a little bit negative, not to be negative, but I'm wondering about the problems that come with technology and social media being in the schools, and any issues that you've faced and how you plan to combat them, because I was lucky enough to go to a high school that did have laptops, and a lot of our work was online using laptops, and definitely got distracted a little bit. So I just am wondering, because this is definitely advancing and spreading, so I'm wondering how it's going to be the best that it can be, I guess.
I'll ask you a question. Did you pass notes when you were in school?
I passed a few notes. Don't tell anyone. I still got through school.
It's a different time, a different way to do it. And it's being able to manage that. At the end of the day, these are important tools that students need to be successful in the world. The cell phone, teachers are constantly saying, students shouldn't have cell phones. Students should have cell phones. It's a tool. It's what they use to be able to access information. Students can do homework on their cell phone now, where if they didn't have that, and we didn't have everything through, we personally use Google, students wouldn't have that access to be able to create that content. So there's always going to be bad that comes along with the good, but to me, it greatly outweighs that negative that may come with the social media piece, where students are accessing it at the wrong times.
I also think that we need to move away from this idea where Generation Z is constantly talked about as, oh, they're distracted by their phones. Oh, they're distracted by social media. We're learning on social media. We're building movements on social media. We're connecting with people from foreign countries and different worlds, and we're saying, how can we work together and make tomorrow better and brighter? So to say that we, right, aren't learning when we're on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is to miss the point. Right? Because I think that the work that I've been able to do, right, creating an organization, creating a company, right, I pay kids to talk about Instagram to clients, right? We have this digital footprint and have this, as digital natives, right? We talk about millennials and Generation Z. Generation Z are social media natives. We think in terms of tweets. We think in terms of the social media landscape. So that knowledge is building and setting the stage for the platforms and policies that are existing today. So I think that it's not like when I'm watching, oftentimes when I'm in class on Facebook, it's not that I'm just like looking at memes. I'm watching AJ Plus videos about what's happening in the world. I'm still learning, right? So I think that, yeah, it can be a distraction, but maybe we're just learning differently.
Yeah. So, a final question for you. So, if you were to give, I'll give you 2 sentences on what the state of the school year should be for 2018, 2019, what would you say?
Talk to your students. Amplify your students. If we're having a conversation about the classroom, those in the classroom should have the head at the table.
Take risks and don't be afraid to fail.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. So I am Rose Kirk, and I appreciate this opportunity to have a great conversation on the state of the school year. You know, at Verizon, we fully believe that it is our mission to ensure that everyone has the tools they need for the digital world, and that we are here to enable individuals to do more new and do more good. And these 2 individuals, Kevin and Ziad, are the representation of how we can do more new and do more good. So thank you very much.
Thank
you.
And thank you for all that you do.